Okay, I'm a D student, and this has been my thesis, my research that I've been conducting for the last 2 years, and hopefully should be finished in the next few months. There's a picture of me at my graduation, very blurry because it was, I've had to scan that off a photograph, because I was the first in my family to go to university, first in my family to leave school with any qualifications, if I'm honest. That doesn't mean to say, you know, I was the cleverest in the family by any stretch, but I was fortunate in that I got qualifications. And one of the reasons I got qualifications was because of the welfare state, because I could have left school at Easter and not done any O-levels, as many people remember. That's what we used to call GCSEs in the olden days, as students would say. I got to stay on, and I got financial support with the Educational Maintenance Award, which had been enshrined in the 1944 Education Act, which was finally abolished in 2010. So, yeah, I was very lucky from that point of view. Right, next slide, sorry. So I was very much inspired by the year I worked in further education. I had worked in schools for 25 years or so. Sorry, I'm just putting my timer on, I forgot. I had worked in schools, and I had been mainly working in post-16, so supporting and teaching students A-level social sciences, and eventually supporting students applying to university as head of sixth form, then director of post-16 studies at a large comprehensive school in Wolverhampton. So that was my experience. I was a get them to university factory master. That was, you know, that was my role in life as a teacher. I, you know, my performance management was all about getting more in. I embraced, you know, the new Labour government's 50% of students going to university. You know, I totally believed in it because my life had been transformed so significantly by my university education compared to my family's. So, you know, for example, I remember once my mum talking to my mum about how much I got paid, and she was really shocked that I got nearly as much a month as she got like for a year on her benefit. And so, you know, my world was very different, and I really wanted to inspire other students. So I probably sent about 1,000 students to university over a sort of 15-20 year period. But I had never been invited to a graduation ceremony until this woman, Charlotte. She was quick to want to not have a pseudonym. She was, you know, she wanted to be called Charlotte, and she said, well, everybody knows there's lots of Charlottes anyway, so I don't really care. Even though I did try to, she wanted to, as she put it, to see her name in print. So Charlotte invited me to a graduation ceremony, and it was amazing, and it rekindled my desire to revisit this group of students. There they are down there, these women who returned to study Access to Higher Education course, which is a really intense 1 year, well, it's not even 1 year, it's 10 months, an assignment every week of about 1,500 words. It really is an intense, amazing preparation for university. In fact, one of my participants said that you know, she felt over prepared for university because of the course she'd done, and that the students who'd done A-level didn't have a clue about how to reference, construct an argument, etc., etc. So they felt, the people in my study, very positive towards that experience. So what about me? I for a long time, I sort of, you know, didn't want to talk about my working class background. And so when I was at university and then as a teacher, I like the finer things in life, and thought that that working class people can't like those sort of things, drink red wine and eat olives. Therefore, I must be posh and can't be working class. But the older I became, and actually working with this FE group, I began to rediscover my own working class heritage. And I realised it really does matter. And I was very much inspired by a chapter by Rose Zimbardo in a book, which I will, it's in the references. She talks about, it's a very old book from 1993, Working Class Women in the Academy, Tokaczak and Faye. And she talks about why it matters, working class academics, really. And she says, as a teacher of working class adults, I do not see myself a dispenser of wisdom, but rather as a leader of an expedition over a terrain that is simply more familiar to me than it is to them. I think it's important for all of my students to recognise that I have as much to gain from our relationship as they do. And that's quite a hard thing to stick to when you're working with working class women who do look up to you and think you know everything. It's quite hard to not take over and to try and be a know-it-all. And it's quite interesting that one of the participants, Sarah, in my research, talked about how important I was as a tutor, not just as an academic advisor, but someone who they described and referencing the Matrix. Apparently my nickname was the Oracle, in that they could come to me and ask me everything from student admissions, how do you register to vote, all sorts of things. So, that's quite important. And I learned tremendous from them about caring, supporting one another, and solidarity. So my research has really been influenced by the work of Diane Ray, and I was really pleased. I think Dave mentioned that he'd been reading Diane Ray earlier. I mean, she just, I'm a bit of a stalker, I think, for her. If she's speaking anywhere, I'm always desperate to see her. And it's quite interesting that she talks about class and higher education. And, she makes the point that in the past, the issue was the lack of working class students in education. Now, the issue, she uses a fancy word, transmuted, which I think is brilliant. She talks about how the issue has become not that working class students don't get into higher education, but where they go. And that's been something that has been part of my research. The most successful, i.e. those who got their degrees, rather than the ones who sort of weren't able to complete, have been those students who have gone to what we'll describe as post-92 universities. Of the students I'm still in contact with, the ones who were the least successful and left university in their second and some even in their third year were the ones who had gone to a red brick university, and which made me think about what Ray talks about a sense of belonging. And, and those of you will be familiar, and I know Richard will be, notions of habitus and social and cultural capital. And there's your fella there, Pierre Bourdieu, who's, is really, that his golden thread is throughout my research. As well as this book, Education in the Working Class, Jackson Marsden, which was published in about 1961, I think. And it's the basis of Diane Ray's Miseducation as well. She returns to it. Jackson Marsden interviewed 44 working class students who had gone to university, men and women, I think from their own hometown as Huddersfield. I think that's where they were from. And it's quite interesting, really, because there's very few conceptual discussions, unlike what you would read in research in education today. It's pre-Bourdieu days, but you can hear the echoes of our understanding of cultural deprivation, cultural capital, ideological control, all those things, and exclusion run through that text. And then you've got here Ivor Goodson, who led a keynote on my EdD, and to be honest, blew my mind away in terms of how I refocused my research. I shifted from, your traditional qualitative approach using interviews to a narrative inquiry and biographical approach. And if Lyndon's around, his work and Barbara's work have been, really informed my approach. And so these are some comments on my research, really. Bev talked about imposter syndrome early on. And though many of us couldn't name it, I think we've all probably experienced it, but, it is a proper theory, and I think its paper was published in 78. I've got the reference at the end. But Sarah, in the second interview, what I did, and sorry, I've missed that bit, haven't I? My interviews, rather than doing one-off interviews with a number of people, I took a narrative inquiry approach, and I did 3 interviews, and I intended to do it with seven participants and 4 tutors on the Access programme. In the end, I did 5 complete sort of narrative interviews, 3 with each participant, and then I had a couple of students who were unable to continue for a number of reasons, but they said I could use their interview still. And then I interviewed 2 tutors in the end, because it was at the height of the pandemic when I did my interviews. We went into lockdown in March, and I had just had my ethical application approved, and I had to ditch that and go to, Zoom land, as many of us did at the time. So I had to rewrite it, and I found it difficult for both participants and tutors for them to commit, because many of them were engaged in online learning and all the stresses and strains, or they had family commitments, or they were working in industries which, we all know went from being dead-end jobs to key workers in the pandemic. And so this is Sarah, talks about how that everyone was more academic than her, and she felt that she didn't deserve her place. I mean, she got a first in the end, and is now considering, well, she's applying for a social work. She's been working for a couple of years using a criminology degree in the prison service, but now she's going to be working in a social work setting with the hope of getting a social work qualification. So this is my methodology. So official statistics, I'm very much a critical theorist. I don't see official statistics as the be all and end all and tell us the whole picture. And I do subscribe to this, I suppose, an interpretivist view of the world, that, that official statistics are often a social construct, in that it's what you ask and who you ask. And as in our age, of the political age, we all know that official statistics aren't always that reliable. And certainly I don't know if you all remember the government's race review some time ago now, that all their official statistics showed there was no such thing as institutional racism, etc. So I began doing unstructured interviews, and then I was quickly, following Ivor Goodson's intervention, switched to looking at narrative inquiry. And why narrative inquiry? Because I began to see that my life, yeah, my background, my experience, me thinking I bought the monkey, me going on to sixth form and traveling free on a bus and coming from Rotherham and introducing myself when I went to university as Cheryl from the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire. I began to realise that my story, though I had a very traditional leaving school 16 and 18 and going straight into university, and it wasn't at all like the working class women in my research who often were subject to neglect at school, self-exclusion, actual exclusion, all sorts of things, teenage pregnancies. My life was not like that. However, as Zimbardo talks about, you know, it is that same terrain. So that's narrative inquiry. So some of the emerging themes of my research, and I realise I've only got a couple of minutes. One, I would notions of belonging, and if anyone's read the work of Ray, belonging is a very strong theme in her work, and it's something that shone through. Epiphanies and turning points. Many of my participants identified an event or an experience that they sometimes, you know, maybe we all have this false view of our history, but, you know, you only take people's word that they felt was their turning point. I was very surprised by the impact, a continued impact of parental expectation on women in their 30s and 40s and even 50s. And then this notion of motherhood's important. Not all of my participants had children, but some of them did. And then this notion of collective, you know, people like us, uni moms. This was the language they described of themselves. And that's a really good quote from Michelle, who was got pregnant at 16, left school with no qualifications, worked for the next sort of 15 years and had 3 more kids. And she's talking about, you know, she never thought it was for her. And then she says, well, why not me? Yeah, why shouldn't it be me? And there's a quote from Sarah again about, it's like a collective of people who's got similar backgrounds. Interestingly, all these participants had attended post-92 universities and were very critical of their attempt to engage with Russell Group universities and selective universities. And that's where the title of my research comes from. When they came back from a university visit, I asked them, you know, what they thought about it. And they were like, oh, well, you know, there's not people like me there. They talk down to us. And I sort of said, well, I went to a university like that, you know, and Charlotte said, yeah, but you're clever, but not posh. And I was a bit taken aback, really, thinking, cheeky, fancy saying I'm not posh, you know what I mean? I order from Ocado when it's on offer. How can they not say I'm posh? So that was quite an interesting insight, I think. And then, you know, when we talk about our relationship with students, one of my supervisors said, oh, Cheryl, you've got to overcome this idea that you're just researching your pals and your mates. And I thought, well, why do I have to do that? You know, I know there's this notion of objectivity and everything, which is what guided my teaching career and which I had to abandon when I was teaching in FE. But they weren't my friends at the beginning of the research, but they damn are now, you know, and I'm not going to make any excuses for that. But obviously, in my thesis, I will, you know, fancy it up a bit and try to cover that up. And then Ray, I mean, reading Ray, I've just found, you know, it's my life, but without the professor bit, obviously. And it makes me quite angry and sad that there's Ray, and then there's Jackson Marsden, and then the students still talking about this exclusion, this, you know, how working class people are, you know, we're just thrown onto the scrap heap, you know, this old 1950s argument of social wastage. it just fills me with fury and that sense of injustice. And that's what you get from reading Ray's work. And in particular, you know, coming to the end, you know, I used to be a firm believer in meritocracy. Now I'm just like, no. And if you look at the recent cabinet reshuffle, you know, there's no meritocracy. It's just a democracy, really, isn't it? So, and so that I'll, you know, and I recently came across Bathmaker, who's been influential in some of my conclusions. So that's me, really, and my research. That's my address, my email, if you want to contact me. That's my Twitter. Please feel free to follow me. And I found Twitter amazing during lockdown. I wouldn't have met people like Sharon and others from the Working Class Academics Association and Working Class Academics Conference had it not been for Twitter. So it's a great source. Okay. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end or in the discussion. Okay.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Really inspiring again, and just brilliant to hear you speaking, Cheryl. That was fantastic. I think these two, they're really complementary as well, both those presentations.